The diesel engine roared to life beneath me as I gripped the controls of my bulldozer. Karen stood 20 feet away, her face twisted with rage and disbelief. Her expensive SUV sat directly in the fire lane, blocking the path that could save lives. "You would not dare," she screamed over the rumble of the machine. But she was wrong, dead wrong. 4 minutes earlier, she had laughed in my face when I asked her to move. 4 minutes earlier, she told me that her HOA authority meant more than city fire codes. 4 minutes earlier, she made the biggest mistake of her entitled life. The massive steel blade scraped against asphalt as I lowered it toward her precious vehicle. Neighbors poured out of their houses, phones recording every second. The fire chief stood behind me, arms crossed, nodding his approval. That was the moment Karen realized she had finally met someone who would not bow to her tyranny. "My name is Mike, and I have spent 15 years operating heavy machinery in this quiet suburban neighborhood called Willowbrook Estates. I am a contractor who believes in hard work, fair play, and keeping people safe. For most of those 15 years, this place felt like paradise. Tree-lined streets, well-maintained homes, and neighbors who actually cared about each other. But paradise has a way of attracting the wrong kind of people. Willowbrook Estates is governed by a homeowners association, like most suburban communities these days. The HOA exists to maintain property values and ensure everyone follows the same basic rules. Keep your grass cut. Paint your house approved colors. Do not park RVs in your driveway. Simple stuff that makes sense. The problem started 3 years ago when Karen Mitchell moved in. Karen is a woman in her early 50s with perfectly styled blonde hair and a wardrobe that costs more than most people make in a month. She bought the biggest house on Maple Street and immediately set her sights on running the entire neighborhood. Within 6 months, she had maneuvered herself into the position of HOA board president. That was when our peaceful community turned into her personal kingdom. Karen treats the HOA rulebook like her Bible and herself like its high priestess. She patrols the streets every morning with her clipboard, measuring grass heights with a ruler and photographing any violation she can find. A garden gnome placed 6 inches too close to the sidewalk becomes a federal case. A Christmas decoration left up 2 days past New Year results in a formal hearing. But Karen had her eye on something bigger than petty violations. The fire lane. Every neighborhood has designated fire lanes, wide stretches of roadway marked with yellow curbs that must remain clear at all times. These lanes allow fire trucks, ambulances, and other emergency vehicles to navigate quickly through residential areas. In Willowbrook Estates, our main fire lane runs along Maple Street, providing direct access to over 40 homes. The fire lane also happens to be the most convenient parking spot in the entire neighborhood. Karen noticed this right away. While the rest of us respected the clearly marked emergency access route, she saw an opportunity. Why should she park in her own driveway and walk an extra 50 feet when this perfectly good stretch of asphalt sat empty most of the time? I should have seen the warning signs earlier. The way she stared at that fire lane during her morning patrol walks. The questions she asked about who exactly had authority over neighborhood parking. The casual comments about how emergency vehicles could easily navigate around a single parked car. Karen was not just another entitled homeowner. She was planning something that would put our entire community at risk. The final piece of her plan fell into place when I started my biggest project yet, a complete home renovation on Oak Street that would require heavy equipment staging for 6 months. The city approved my permits, and I arranged to store my bulldozer and other machinery in the designated construction zone. Karen saw my bulldozer as a threat to her authority. I saw it as the tool that would eventually restore justice to our neighborhood. Neither of us realized we were about to engage in a battle that would define Willowbrook Estates for years to come. Karen fired the first shot on a Tuesday morning in March. I was loading equipment into my truck when I noticed her SUV parked directly in the fire lane, its chrome bumper gleaming in the morning sun. At first, I assumed it was a mistake. Maybe she was just dropping something off quickly and would move in a few minutes. 2 hours later, her vehicle was still there. I walked over and knocked on her front door. Karen answered wearing a silk robe and holding a coffee cup like a weapon. "Good morning, Karen. I noticed your car is parked in the fire lane. Just wanted to let you know in case you forgot." Her smile was colder than January wind. "I did not forget anything, Mike. I am the HOA president, and I have decided that the fire lane can serve dual purposes when there is no active emergency." I stared at her, waiting for the punchline. None came. "Karen, that is not how fire lanes work. They need to stay clear 24 hours a day. What if there is an emergency?" "Then I will move my car," she said, already closing the door. "Until then, I will park wherever I choose." The door slammed in my face. That afternoon, I witnessed exactly why fire lanes exist. Mrs. Patterson on Elm Street had fallen down her stairs and broken her hip. The ambulance screamed into our neighborhood, its sirens echoing off the perfect suburban facades. I watched from my work site as the paramedics approached Maple Street and found their direct route blocked by Karen's SUV. The ambulance driver had to back up, circle around the block, and approach from the opposite direction. Those extra 3 minutes might not sound like much, but when someone is lying on the floor in agony, every second counts. I called Karen immediately. "There was just an emergency, and your car blocked the ambulance. This is exactly why fire lanes exist." "Did they get to Mrs. Patterson eventually?" Karen asked, her tone bored. "Yes, but—" "Then I do not see the problem. My car is not causing any real issues." "Karen, you are literally blocking emergency access to 40 homes. And you are literally storing heavy equipment in a residential neighborhood. We all make compromises." The conversation ended there, but the war had officially begun. Over the next week, Karen escalated her fire lane occupation. She started parking there every single day, sometimes leaving her car for hours while she ran errands or attended her yoga classes. She even recruited her teenage son to park his pickup truck there on weekends, creating a two-vehicle blockade. I documented everything with photos and timestamps. Karen noticed me taking pictures and actually posed next to her illegally parked vehicles, flashing a pageant smile like she was proud of her rebellion. But Karen was not finished with me yet. The violations started arriving in my mailbox like a plague of legal locusts. Apparently, my construction equipment violated 17 different HOA regulations. The bulldozer was too close to the street. My work truck was parked at the wrong angle. The portable toilet was not aesthetically pleasing to the neighborhood standards. Each violation came with a $50 fine and a demand for immediate compliance. I spent an entire Saturday researching city ordinances and HOA regulations. What I discovered made my blood boil. Karen was completely wrong about the fire lane. City fire codes explicitly prohibit any vehicle from parking in designated emergency access routes, regardless of HOA authority. Her actions were not just selfish, they were illegal. I also discovered that my construction permits gave me explicit rights to equipment storage that superseded HOA authority. Every violation she had issued was invalid. Armed with this knowledge, I drove to City Hall and filed formal complaints about Karen's fire lane violations. The fire chief assured me they would investigate immediately and take appropriate action. But Karen had one more card to play. The next morning, I found 3 more vehicles parked in the fire lane. Karen had recruited her neighbors to join her rebellion, turning our community's emergency access route into a private parking lot. My bulldozer sat in the construction zone like a sleeping giant, its yellow paint bright against the gray morning sky. I patted its steel hull and made a silent promise. If the system would not stop Karen, maybe it was time for a more direct approach. Karen's next move proved she had completely lost touch with reality. I was welding support beams on the Oak Street project when she marched up to my work site with her clipboard and an expression that could curdle milk. Behind her followed 2 other HOA board members who looked like they would rather be anywhere else in the world. "Mike, I am issuing you a final notice," she announced, waving an official-looking document. "All construction equipment must be removed from this neighborhood within 48 hours." I set down my welding torch and lifted my safety mask. "Karen, I have city permits for this equipment. You cannot override municipal authority." "Watch me." She thrust the document at my chest. I read it carefully, nodding the impressive letterhead and official language. But legal documents require actual legal authority, which Karen clearly lacked. "This is not enforceable," I said, handing it back. "My permits come from the city, not the HOA." "We will see about that," Karen snapped. "I am calling the police, the fire department, and the mayor's office. This neighborhood will not be held hostage by your construction project." One of the board members behind her shifted uncomfortably. "Karen, maybe we should discuss this further before." "The discussion is over," Karen interrupted. "Either the equipment goes, or I will make life very difficult for Mr. Mike here." I watched her storm away, her heels clicking against the asphalt like a countdown timer. The other board members offered apologetic shrugs before following their dictator home. That evening, Karen launched her petition drive. She went door to door throughout Willowbrook Estates, armed with a clipboard and a sob story about how my construction project was destroying neighborhood property values. According to Karen, my bulldozer represented everything wrong with modern society, working-class people who did not respect the established order. The results were mixed. About half the neighbors signed her petition, either because they genuinely supported her or because they were too afraid to say no. The other half quietly told me they thought Karen had lost her mind and hoped someone would finally put her in her place. Mrs. Chen from Pine Street pulled me aside during one of my lunch breaks. "That woman came to my door yesterday demanding I sign her paper. When I refused, she threatened to have my fence inspected for code violations. Mike, we are all afraid of her." But fear was about to change sides. Fire Chief Roberts arrived at my work site on Thursday afternoon, his expression grim. He was a 30-year veteran who had seen every kind of emergency situation imaginable. "Mike, I need to discuss the fire lane situation with you. We have been monitoring the violations, and they are getting worse." I showed him my documentation, photos, timestamps, video footage of Karen's vehicles blocking emergency access. Chief Roberts studied each piece of evidence with professional thoroughness. "This is unacceptable," he said finally. "I am going to speak with Ms. Mitchell directly. Maybe an official warning from the fire department will convince her to stop this madness." 20 minutes later, I watched Chief Roberts knock on Karen's front door. Through her picture window, I could see her gesturing wildly as he delivered his warning. The conversation lasted exactly 3 minutes before Karen slammed the door in his face. The fire chief walked back to his vehicle, shaking his head in disbelief. He stopped at my work site on his way out of the neighborhood. I have never seen anything like that in 30 years of public service. She actually told me that the fire department has no jurisdiction over HOA parking regulations. What happens now? I asked. Now we document everything and prepare for the inevitable emergency call. Because with 4 vehicles blocking that fire lane, something bad is going to happen soon. He was right. The next morning, Karen had recruited 2 more neighbors to park in the fire lane. 6 vehicles now created a fortress of entitlement across our neighborhood's main emergency access route. I stood in front of my bulldozer, my hands resting on its warm steel hull. The machine had been sitting idle for weeks, but its power was undeniable. 50,000 pounds of focused purpose, waiting for the right moment to restore order to our community. That moment was coming soon. Everything changed on a Friday afternoon in April. I was installing kitchen cabinets in the Oak Street house when the siren started wailing. Not the distant sound of emergency vehicles heading somewhere else, but the urgent, immediate wail of an ambulance racing into our neighborhood. Through the front window, I watched the ambulance turn onto Maple Street at full speed. The paramedics were responding to a cardiac emergency. Someone's life hung in the balance, and every second mattered. Then I saw Karen's fortress of parked vehicles blocking the fire lane. The ambulance driver slammed on the brakes, stopping just short of the illegally parked cars. For a moment, the vehicle sat there, lights flashing and sirens screaming, as if the driver could not believe what he was seeing. I dropped my tools and ran toward the scene. The paramedics were already out of the ambulance, grabbing their equipment and assessing the situation. The house they needed to reach was Mrs. Henderson on Oak Street, a 73-year-old widow who lived alone and had been suffering from heart problems for months. "Can you move these cars?" the lead paramedic shouted to anyone who would listen. I looked around desperately for Karen, but her SUV sat empty in the driveway. She was not even home to witness the chaos she had created. "The owners are not here," I called back. "Can you get through?" The paramedic pointed to the narrow gap between vehicles. "Not with the stretcher. We will have to carry everything by hand and hope we can get her out on foot." I watched in horror as the emergency medical team grabbed their cardiac monitor, oxygen tank, medication bag, and defibrillator. Equipment that normally rolls smoothly from ambulance to patient now had to be hand-carried around Karen's obstacle course. The extra distance was not far, maybe 100 yards, but Mrs. Henderson was experiencing a massive heart attack. In cardiac emergencies, brain damage begins within 4 minutes of circulation stopping. Every delayed second increased her chances of permanent disability or death. I followed the paramedics to Mrs. Henderson's house, feeling helpless and furious. Through her front window, I could see her lying motionless on the living room floor, her face gray and her breathing shallow. The paramedics worked with professional efficiency, but I could see the frustration in their movements. They were fighting against time with one hand tied behind their backs, all because Karen valued her convenience over human life. 15 minutes later, they loaded Mrs. Henderson onto a stretcher and began the trek back to the ambulance. Her condition had stabilized, but the delay had cost precious time that could have made the difference between full recovery and permanent damage. As the ambulance finally pulled away, sirens fading into the distance, I stood in the middle of Maple Street staring at the 6 vehicles that had nearly killed a neighbor. That was when Karen came home. She pulled into her driveway like nothing had happened, climbing out of her SUV with shopping bags from the mall. When she noticed me standing near her illegally parked car, she actually smiled. "Afternoon, Mike. I trust you are not planning to damage my vehicle." The casual tone of her voice hit me like a physical blow. This woman had just witnessed paramedics struggling to save a life because of her selfishness, and she was making jokes about property damage. Karen, Mrs. Henderson, had a heart attack. The ambulance could not get through because of these cars. The paramedics had to carry all their equipment by hand. Karen shrugged, completely unmoved. Did they save her? That is not the point. Your illegal parking nearly killed someone. But they did save her, correct? So no harm was actually done. I stared at her in disbelief. No harm done. Karen, she could have died because you blocked emergency access to her home. And if she had died, it would have been unfortunate, Karen replied, her voice as cold as winter steel. But I have every right to park on public streets, regardless of what some painted curb suggests. She turned toward her house, dismissing me completely. Karen, wait. She paused at her front door, looking back with annoyed impatience. If you do not move these cars voluntarily, I will move them for you. Karen laughed, actually laughed at my threat. You and what army, Mike? I am the HOA president. I have legal authority here. You are just a contractor with a grudge. The door slammed shut, leaving me alone with 6 illegally parked vehicles and a bulldozer that suddenly felt like the only solution to an impossible problem. That night, I sat on my front porch staring at the Fire Lane blockade. Mrs. Henderson was stable at the hospital, but the doctors said the delay in treatment had caused permanent heart damage. She would never fully recover from something that should have been completely preventable. I thought about every other elderly resident in our neighborhood. What would happen when the next emergency occurred? How many more people would suffer because one woman refused to follow basic safety rules? The city had failed to stop Karen. The fire department had no enforcement power over HOA parking disputes. The police treated it as a civil matter between neighbors. But I had a bulldozer. And sometimes, when the system fails completely, ordinary people have to take extraordinary action to protect their community. I woke up Monday morning with absolute clarity about what needed to happen. Karen had made her choice. She valued her convenience over community safety, her authority over human life. Every attempt at reasoning had failed. Every official channel had been exhausted. The woman who nearly killed Mrs. Henderson was about to learn that actions have consequences. I ate breakfast slowly, watching through my kitchen window as Karen performed her morning ritual. She emerged from her house at exactly 8:30, wearing her designer workout clothes and carrying her coffee cup like a scepter of suburban royalty. She climbed into her SUV and backed out of her driveway. Then, with deliberate defiance, she pulled directly into the fire lane and parked. Game on. I finished my coffee, laced up my work boots, and walked to the construction site. My bulldozer sat exactly where I had left it, 50,000 pounds of yellow steel and diesel power, waiting patiently for its moment of glory. The machine started with a deep, rumbling roar that vibrated through the ground and rattled windows throughout the neighborhood. I let it warm up for several minutes, checking fluid levels and testing the hydraulic systems. Everything was perfect. By the time I drove the bulldozer onto Maple Street, a crowd had gathered. Neighbors poured out of their houses, drawn by the sound of the diesel engine, and the sight of heavy machinery rolling down their pristine suburban road. Some held coffee cups. Others grabbed their phones to record whatever was about to happen. I stopped the bulldozer 20 feet from Karen's SUV and shut off the engine. The sudden silence felt heavier than the noise had been. Karen emerged from her house, moving with the confidence of someone who still believed her authority meant something. She approached my machine with her arms crossed and her chin raised in defiance. "What exactly do you think you are doing, Mike?" I climbed down from the operator's seat and faced her directly. This was the moment for final diplomacy, the last chance for sanity to prevail. "Karen, I am giving you one final opportunity to move your vehicles out of the fire lane. After that, I will move them for you." She laughed, the same dismissive sound that had haunted my dreams for weeks. "You are not going to touch my car. I will have you arrested for destruction of property." "Will you move the vehicles?" "Absolutely not. I have every right to park there." "No, Karen, you do not." I turned toward the crowd of neighbors and raised my voice so everyone could hear. "I called the fire department this morning. Chief Roberts is on his way to oversee this operation. The city has officially determined that these vehicles represent a public safety hazard that must be removed immediately." As if summoned by my words, Chief Roberts arrived in his red SUV, followed by 2 police cruisers. The cavalry had arrived, but not to save Karen. Chief Roberts approached with official documentation. "Ms. Mitchell, you are in violation of city fire codes. These vehicles must be moved immediately, or they will be towed at your expense." Karen's confidence cracked slightly. "You cannot tow cars from a public street without proper notice." "Actually, we can," Officer Martinez said, stepping forward with his own paperwork. "Emergency vehicles require clear access at all times. Your vehicles are creating a public safety hazard." "Then call a tow truck," Karen snapped. Chief Roberts smiled grimly. "The city tow trucks are all busy today. Fortunately, Mr. Mike here has volunteered his services." I climbed back into the bulldozer and started the engine. The crowd of neighbors had grown to nearly 30 people, all watching with fascination as suburban justice finally arrived. Karen's face transformed from confident defiance to dawning horror. She finally understood that this was not a bluff, not a negotiation, not another empty threat she could dismiss with laughter. "You would not dare!" she screamed over the rumble of the diesel engine. I lowered the blade until it touched the asphalt, the steel scraping against concrete with a sound like justice being served. Then I put the machine in gear and began moving forward. Karen's SUV was first. The bulldozer approached her vehicle with mechanical precision, the blade making contact with the rear bumper. I applied just enough pressure to start the car rolling, pushing it slowly but inexorably out of the fire lane. Karen ran alongside her moving vehicle, screaming threats and curses that were lost in the diesel roar. The crowd watched in fascination as the most expensive car in the neighborhood got treated like any other obstacle. I pushed her SUV 50 feet down the street before stopping and backing away. The vehicle was undamaged but thoroughly humiliated, sitting sideways in the middle of the road like a scolded child. One down, 5 to go. The second vehicle belonged to Karen's teenage son, a lifted pickup truck that he probably thought made him look tough. The bulldozer disagreed. I hooked the blade under the rear bumper and gently guided the truck out of the fire lane, depositing it next to his mother's SUV. By the third vehicle, the crowd was cheering. By the fourth, someone had started recording everything for social media. By the fifth, Karen had collapsed on her front lawn, sobbing hysterically as her fortress of entitlement crumbled before her eyes. The sixth and final vehicle took less than 2 minutes to relocate. When I shut off the bulldozer engine, the fire lane stood completely clear for the first time in months. The silence was broken by spontaneous applause from 30 neighbors, who had finally witnessed the end of Karen's reign of terror. Chief Roberts walked over and shook my hand. "Outstanding work, Mike. The fire lane is now accessible for emergency vehicles." Karen lay on her grass, staring up at the sky like someone who had just watched her entire worldview collapse. Her authority was gone. Her defiance had been met with overwhelming force. Her carefully constructed kingdom of suburban tyranny had been bulldozed into dust. Justice had arrived in Willowbrook Estates, and it was painted bright yellow. The aftermath was even more satisfying than the main event. Karen struggled to her feet, grass stains on her designer workout clothes and mascara streaking down her cheeks. For the first time since moving to Willowbrook Estates, she looked exactly like what she was, a defeated bully who had finally met her match. "I am calling my lawyer," she sobbed, pulling out her phone with shaking hands. "This is destruction of property. This is harassment. This is legal," Officer Martinez interrupted, showing her the official documentation. "The city fire marshal has authorized the removal of vehicles blocking emergency access routes. Mr. Mike was acting under official authority." Karen stared at the paperwork like it was written in a foreign language. After months of wielding regulations like weapons, she could not process being on the receiving end of actual legal authority. "But my car," she whimpered. "He pushed my car with a bulldozer." "No damage was done to any vehicle," Chief Roberts observed, walking among the relocated cars. "Mr. Mike showed remarkable skill and restraint. Your vehicles were moved, not destroyed." The crowd of neighbors began to disperse, but not before several people approached me with thanks and congratulations. Mrs. Chen shook my hand enthusiastically. "Mike, you did what we all wanted to do but were too afraid to try. Thank you for standing up to her." Mr. Rodriguez from Pine Street clapped me on the shoulder. "That woman has terrorized this neighborhood for 3 years. Today she finally learned that bullies do not always win." Even some of the neighbors who had initially supported Karen's petition seemed relieved that her reign was over. They approached cautiously, offering apologetic smiles and quiet words of support. But the best moment came when Mrs. Henderson's daughter arrived. Sarah Henderson was a nurse who had taken emergency leave to care for her mother after the heart attack. She had heard about the fire lane incident from other neighbors and wanted to see the aftermath for herself. "You are the contractor who cleared the fire lane?" she asked. "Yes, ma'am. My mother is home from the hospital now. The doctors said the delay in treatment caused permanent damage to her heart. She will never fully recover because of what that woman did." Sarah looked at the clear fire lane, then at Karen's relocated vehicles, then back at me. "Thank you," she said simply. "You may have saved the next person's life." Those words meant more to me than any official commendation or legal victory. Mrs. Henderson would live with the consequences of Karen's selfishness for the rest of her life, but at least no one else would suffer the same fate. Karen made one final attempt to reclaim her authority. "This is not over," she announced to anyone who would listen. "I am still the HOA president. I still have the right to enforce neighborhood regulations." Chief Roberts stepped forward with another official document. "Actually, Ms. Mitchell, the city has initiated a formal investigation into your conduct as HOA president. Your actions have endangered public safety and violated multiple municipal codes." What does that mean? Karen asked, her voice barely above a whisper. It means your HOA authority is suspended pending the outcome of our investigation. The city will be appointing an interim administrator to oversee neighborhood governance until this matter is resolved. Karen's world collapsed completely. Her authority was gone. Her reputation was destroyed. Her fortress of illegally parked vehicles had been bulldozed into submission by a contractor she had tried to intimidate. The neighbors who had once feared her violations and fines now looked at her with pity or contempt. The woman who had ruled Willowbrook Estates through fear and bureaucratic intimidation was now just another resident with grass stains on her expensive clothes. As the police cars and fire department vehicles pulled away, I started my bulldozer one more time and drove it back to the construction site. The machine had served its purpose perfectly, not as a weapon of destruction, but as a tool of justice. The fire lane stretched clear and accessible along Maple Street, its yellow curbs gleaming in the afternoon sun. Emergency vehicles could now reach any house in the neighborhood without obstruction. Karen's fortress of entitlement had been replaced by the open road that could save lives. I parked the bulldozer and patted its steel hull affectionately. Sometimes the system works. Sometimes official channels resolve disputes fairly and efficiently. But sometimes, when bureaucracy fails and bullies run unchecked, ordinary people have to take extraordinary action to protect their community. Today had been one of those times. And tomorrow, Willowbrook Estates would be a safer place, because one contractor refused to let tyranny triumph over common sense. 6 months later, Willowbrook Estates had transformed into the community it was always meant to be. The fire lane remained pristinely clear, its yellow curbs maintained with almost religious devotion by residents who had learned the hard way why emergency access matters. Not a single vehicle had parked there since the day my bulldozer delivered its lesson in civic responsibility. Karen Mitchell had disappeared from neighborhood life as completely as her authority had been stripped away. The city investigation had resulted in her permanent removal from the HOA board and substantial fines for endangering public safety. Her house went up for sale 3 months after the bulldozer incident, and she moved to a different suburb where her reputation had not preceded her. The new HOA board consisted of reasonable people who viewed their role as community service rather than personal empire building. They focused on genuine neighborhood improvement projects instead of petty violations and power trips. Violation notices became rare exceptions rather than daily occurrences. Mrs. Henderson recovered as much as possible from her heart attack, though she would never regain full strength. Her daughter Sarah organized a neighborhood appreciation dinner in my honor, where dozens of residents shared stories about how Karen's reign of terror had affected their lives. Mike did not just clear the fire lane, Mrs. Chen told the crowd. He cleared away the fear that had been poisoning our community for years. The evening was filled with laughter and genuine friendship emotions that had been suppressed during Karen's rule, but quickly returned once her toxic influence was removed. Chief Roberts stopped by my work site regularly, always commenting on how refreshing it was to see a neighborhood that actually prioritized safety over politics. The fire department had not received a single complaint about blocked emergency access since the bulldozer intervention. "You know, Mike," he said during one visit, "in 30 years of public service, I have never seen a community problem solved so decisively. Sometimes direct action is the only language bullies understand." My construction project on Oak Street was completed on schedule and under budget. The new homeowners were a young family who appreciated living in a neighborhood where common sense prevailed over bureaucratic nonsense. But the most satisfying moment came on a Tuesday evening in October. I was driving home from another job site when I heard sirens approaching Willowbrook Estates. An ambulance raced into our neighborhood, responding to an emergency call from Elm Street. I pulled over and watched as the ambulance navigated smoothly down Maple Street, its path completely unobstructed by illegally parked vehicles. The paramedics reached their destination in record time, and their patient, an elderly man who had fallen and broken his leg, received immediate medical attention. No delays, no obstacles, no preventable complications. Just a clear fire lane, serving its intended purpose of saving lives. As I drove home that evening, I reflected on the lessons learned from our neighborhood's brief civil war. Bullies depend on good people doing nothing. Authority without accountability becomes tyranny. Sometimes the system fails, and ordinary citizens must step up to protect their community. The bulldozer sat in my equipment yard, ready for the next construction project. But it would always be remembered as the machine that restored justice to Willowbrook Estates, 50,000 pounds of steel and diesel that proved one simple truth. When entitled people believe they are above the rules, sometimes it takes a bigger force to remind them that safety and common sense will always triumph over selfishness and ego. The fire lane remains clear to this day, a yellow-striped testament to what happens when good people finally decide they have had enough of bad behavior. And Karen Mitchell learned that some battles should never be fought, especially against someone who owns a bulldozer and is not afraid to use it for the greater good.